Well, our chapters were chapter 12 and chapter 13, the human price, and human error window. What we're going to focus on in the beginning is the physiological effects of the DDT, looking at larger structures of the human body, microscopic structures, and also the effects of the DDT. Now, the biological effects are cumulative over time, so the hazard of the individual may depend on the sum of the exposures throughout their life, not just in certain periods of time. Often the dangers are ignored because it does happen over such a long period of time. The individual doesn't realize how much they are being exposed to these pesticides, so later on in life it will catch up with them. That's why I included this quote right here: men are naturally most impressed by diseases which have obvious manifestations, yet some of their worst enemies creep upon them unobtrusively. And that was from chapter 12 in Science Spring. Chapter 12 talks about how not only spraying the pesticide that individual is affected, but that it's also a problem of ecology in which this kind of poison is passed down from link to link throughout the entire food chain. And that's how it goes. Even if an individual does not have sudden symptoms, one who handles the material is without a doubt storing up toxic materials in his or her body. Now, the smallest intake of these chlorinated hydrocarbons is stored, and it becomes lodged in actually the fatty tissue of your body. The poisons in the fatty tissue may or may not strike quickly. In chapter 12, it gives an example of when this did strike. It was from a New Zealand medical journal where a man under treatment for obesity all of a sudden developed symptoms of poisoning. Now, when his fat was examined, they did find the chlorinated hydrocarbon in his fat. Now, in chapter 12, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, it warned of the hazards of insecticide stored in body fat. And it pointed out that drugs or chemicals that are cumulative require greater caution than those having no tendency to be stored in the tissue. Now, body fat has many important functions with which the stored poisons may interfere, and the fat is distributed throughout the body, including in organs and tissues. These fat-soluble insecticides become stored in individual cells where they are in the position to interfere with functions such as oxidation and even energy production. Now, with the liver presides over so many vital activities that damage could have serious consequences. Just to highlight some of the vital activities of the liver so you guys can understand that. The liver provides bile for the digestion of fats. It receives blood from the digestive tract. It is deeply involved in the metabolism of all of the principal things dealing with food. It stores sugar in the form of glycogen, and it releases it as glucose. Also, it helps build proteins, maintains cholesterol at its proper level in blood plasma, and it's also a storehouse of many vitamins. So that's a lot of the things that goes on within the liver. So basically, if you didn't have a normal functioning liver, then the body would be defenseless against all kinds of poisons, including pesticides. At the top of the slide, those are two harmless insecticides that the book talked about, saying that they're less poisonous than other pesticides because a liver enzyme deals with them individually, which in that case, it alters their molecules in such a way that their capacity of harm is lessened. Now, since the liver deals with the majority of the toxic materials to which we are exposed, being attacked by pesticides, it hurts its line of defense against the poisons, and that becomes weakened. So the liver would not only be incapable of protecting us from poisons, but all of its activities would be interfered with when you're in contact with these pesticides. So two examples from the book that weren't necessarily proven, but I'll get to that, where they said that the liver was affected, was when hepatitis began to increase during the 1950s, and it was continuing to go up, and cirrhosis showed an increase. Now, basically, what the book said was that these were never proved that the pesticides would have caused this, basically because they didn't want to try this on humans, because obviously it was hurting them, so they didn't want to test it on anybody. But what the text said was plain common sense suggests that the relation between the soaring rate of liver disease and the occurrence of liver poisons in the environment is no coincidence. So that was from chapter 12 over 200. Now moving on to the nervous system, the chlorinated hydrocarbons and the organic phosphates both affect the nervous system, but they do so differently. So in the nervous system, the cerebellum and the higher motor cortex are thought to be the areas affected most by DDT. And what you'll see from this is abnormal sensations of prickling, burning, or itching, as well as tremors or even convulsions may follow exposures to these amounts of DDT. Now, I took out two examples from the book that actually talked about where people have experimented and exposed themselves to DDT on purpose. Both of these are from the text. The first example is that two British investigators deliberately exposed themselves to DDT. What they did was they absorbed DDT through their skin by having a direct contact with walls that had paint on them that contained about 2% of DDT. Now, when they did this, what they said their symptoms was that they were tired, they felt a heaviness and aching in their limbs. Their mental state was really distressed, and they were extremely irritable because of this. They had a great distaste for work of any sort. Their joint pains were violent, and that they had a feeling of mental incompetence in tackling even the simplest mental task. And they did that on purpose to see what this would do to somebody. Another example is that a British experimenter applied DDT in acetone solution to his skin. He said that he had a heaviness and aching in his limbs, muscular weakness, and spasms of extreme nervous tension. Now, this experimenter actually could not return to work, it said in the book, and he had to take some time off. And when he did return, his ethic was like deteriorating, like he really couldn't do much, so he took off even more time. And it says in the book that when it was reported to the British Medical Journal, he still had not made a complete recovery from being exposed to this. So. One of the articles we're going to refer to today is an article that I found from greenchange.org. It's called New Tests Show 30 out of 37 Pesticides Block Male Hormones. It's from the Environmental Health News. It was actually from last February the 15th of 2011. 30 out of 37 pesticides tested by the University of London blocked or mimicked male hormones, including 16 that had no known hormonal activity until now. Most of the newly discovered hormone disruptors are fungicides applied to fruit and vegetable crops, including strawberries and lettuce. And traces of it.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the cells, and this is more focused on the second chapter in our window. And with humans mainly respond to things that are catastrophic and big, this breaks it down. Rachel describes how DDT and other pesticides affect the smaller molecular level and how the effects on smaller things can be more widespread.
So can cause symptoms ranging from loss of memory to insomnia, and also from nightmares to absolute mania. And there's also another study done in the Netherlands, which she told us about in chapter 13, I believe. And in this study, they found that repeated exposure to pesticides during